Let me ask you something. Have you ever dismissed a small amount of money as not being worth the effort to save? $10, $20, an amount so small it feels pointless to even think about. Most people believe real wealth only comes from big moves, big salaries, big opportunities. This is the story of a man named Thomas, who started with nothing more than $10 a day and one stubborn habit, and ended up somewhere none of his friends, or even he, ever expected. By the end of this story, you might stop underestimating the small amount of money you overlook every single day. Before we continue, if stories like this speak to you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We share real stories about money, discipline, and the choices that quietly shape our future. Stay until the end, because this one might change how you look at your spare change. Thomas was 27 years old, working as a mechanic at a small auto shop on the edge of town. He liked his job well enough, but the pay was modest, and like most people his age, he lived paycheck to paycheck without really noticing it had become a pattern. He wasn't reckless with money, he just never paid close enough attention to where it went. One afternoon, a customer waiting on his car struck up a conversation while Thomas worked underneath it. The man was older, maybe 70, dressed plainly, driving a car that had clearly seen better decades. He mentioned, almost in passing, that he had never earned much in his life, but he had never gone a single day without setting aside at least $10, no matter what. Thomas laughed a little. $10 a day? That's barely anything. The old man shrugged. It wasn't the $10 that mattered. It was the day I never skipped. Thomas didn't think much of it at the time. He finished the repair, took the payment, and moved on to the next car. But that phrase stuck with him longer than he expected. The day I never skipped. That night, lying in bed, Thomas realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd gone even a single day thinking seriously about saving anything at all. A few weeks later, Thomas's car, the one he actually owned, not one he was fixing for someone else, broke down on the way to work. The repair estimate came back higher than he expected, and when he checked his account to cover it, he realized he didn't have enough, not even close. He ended up borrowing the difference from his brother, mumbling an excuse about cash flow being weird this month, the same excuse he'd used more than once before. His brother covered it without complaint, but Thomas caught something in his expression. Not judgment exactly, just quiet concern. That night, Thomas sat down and did something he had never actually done. He pulled up 3 months of his bank statements and looked at them line by line. Small charges everywhere, coffee most mornings, food delivery instead of cooking several nights a week, subscriptions he'd forgotten he was still paying for. None of it looked reckless on its own. Together, it added up to more than enough to have covered his car repair without borrowing a cent. He thought about the old man's voice in the shop. It wasn't the $10 that mattered. It was the day I never skipped. Thomas sat with that for a long time. He'd always assumed people built wealth through some big break he simply hadn't gotten yet. A promotion, a lucky investment, something dramatic. It had never occurred to him that the old man, driving a car that had clearly seen better decades, might actually be the wealthier of the two of them, simply because he never skipped a day. A thought settled over him, uncomfortable and clear. What if I've been waiting for a big moment that was never going to matter as much as the small one I keep skipping? If you're watching this and you've ever brushed off a small amount of money as not worth the effort, ask yourself honestly, is it really too small a matter, or have you just never given it enough days in a row to prove otherwise? The next morning, Thomas didn't wait for a better paycheck or a less busy week to start. He opened a separate savings account before he even left for work and moved $10 into it, right then, before he could talk himself out of it. It felt almost silly.
$10 barely covered a cup of coffee, let alone anything meaningful. But he remembered the old man's words, and instead of judging the amount, he focused on one simple rule: never skip a day, no matter how small the $10 felt.
The habit was harder to keep than he expected. Some mornings he'd forget until the afternoon, then have to stop what he was doing just to move the money before the day ended. A coworker noticed him doing it once and asked what he was doing. "Just moving $10 into savings," Thomas said. "Every day, no matter what." The coworker laughed. "That's not going to do much." Thomas shrugged. "Maybe not today. Ask me in a year." There were nights he almost skipped. One evening, exhausted after a long shift, he nearly went to bed without transferring the money, telling himself one missed day wouldn't matter. Then he thought about the old man's car, still running after decades, still getting him where he needed to go. Thomas got up, grabbed his phone, and moved the $10 before he let himself sleep. Weeks turned into months. The habit stopped requiring willpower and simply became part of his day, the same as brushing his teeth. He wasn't thinking about getting rich. He was just refusing to skip. And slowly, without him fully noticing at first, that refusal started adding up to something real. A year passed. Thomas hadn't skipped a single day. $10 every day without exception had quietly become $3,650 sitting in an account he hadn't touched once. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was proof, undeniable and sitting right there in front of him, that the old man had been right. He didn't stop. If anything, the proof made the habit easier to keep. He learned to invest the savings instead of letting it sit untouched. And over the following years, that steady, boring $10 a day, compounding quietly in the background, grew into something Thomas never could have predicted when he started. What began as a habit to avoid another borrowed car repair eventually became a real financial cushion, then a small investment portfolio, then, years later, enough for a down payment on a home he owned outright faster than almost anyone he knew. One afternoon, an old car pulled into the shop for a routine repair, the same make and model, though not the same one, that had first started it all. Thomas found himself thinking about the old man, wondering if he'd ever know what that offhand comment in a waiting room had turned into. That evening, Thomas's brother stopped by, the same brother who had quietly covered his car repair years earlier. He noticed the newly paid-off house, the calm, unhurried way Thomas talked about money now. "What changed?" his brother asked. Thomas smiled. "Somebody told me it wasn't about the $10. It was about the day I never skipped." His brother nodded slowly, letting that settle. Here's what Thomas learned, the hard way. It was never really about how much money he could save on any single day. It was about refusing, day after day, to let himself skip. $10 felt insignificant every single time he set it aside. It was only years later, all added together, that he understood exactly how significant it had actually been. So here's a question for you. What's the small amount you've been telling yourself isn't worth saving? Tell us in the comments, how much could you set aside every day, starting today, without missing a single one? If this story meant something to you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. It was never about the $10. It's about the day you never skip. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.